Hello and welcome to Lightroom 101 Part 2. Today we're going to be going over some more tools in the basic category. Last episode we did temperature and tint. Check that out to understand those. Today we're going to be looking at exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. All these just kind of go with adjusting your image's lightness in different areas. And we're going to go through a few different examples of the difference they can make. This is kind of the second thing you do when editing a photo, or at least the second thing I do when editing a photo. And I'm gonna first start with showing you some examples of finished images. So I did everything else except for the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks before and after, basically. So we've got this before I did all those aforementioned categories, and then after. So basically, with this image, you can tell that I'm bringing the highlights down so you can actually see the face, and bring the shadows up so you can see that part of the face. So yeah, let's look at a different one. This is before. You can't basically see anything. It's very dark. And then there you go. Your camera actually captures a lot of data if you shoot in RAW, and depending on the camera and the sensor and all that stuff. But most DSLRs, when you shoot in RAW, you can get a lot of that data back. Let's start with this image, actually. For this image, clearly it is too dark, so we're going to bring the exposure up, and that is what the exposure does. Basically, the entirety of everything in the image becoming brighter. That's what it does. Contrast. So contrast takes your highlights and makes them brighter, and your darks and makes them darker, so that you have more contrast between the two. In this image, not necessarily a good idea, because we already have a really dark subject and a decently bright background. Highlights. So this targets basically the light portion of your image, like the background. So this part, nothing's really blown out. A little bit too bright. So when we take the highlights down, you can see like the details of the clouds here and a little bit better of the horizon. So we're going to take those all the way down because this is such an extreme image, and we're probably going to take the shadows almost all the way up because we need to see this face, our subject's face. So yeah, that's shadows. Shadows are basically the darker portions of the image, and you can just kind of be a little bit more specific. Highlights and shadows, and adjusting those individually. Now the whites and blacks, those are about the same thing except a little bit more extreme. The whites are all the way at the end of the spectrum, just on this side right here of the histogram, all the way to the highest of the highlights. These are the whites. So we can adjust those. Clearly it's a lot of things, but we're going to take those down a little bit because, again, there's too much in the background. Then the blacks are the darkest of the dark. So if we took those down, you can see that we're crushing a lot of the image. If we bring those up, we can bring some of the image back. But you want to be careful with these because you can lose some interesting contrast in your image if you bring everything the opposite direction. From, like, if you bring all the whites down and all the blacks up, you're going to end up with a flatter image that's probably not as interesting to look at. So I'm going to bring those just a little bit higher, and I'm going to bring the whites just a little bit lower. So there you go. That's what I would do with this image, but let's look at a couple other examples that are a little bit less extreme. All right, so let's look at a very different example. Right here we have kind of the opposite. So our subject's face, my lovely girlfriend, is way too bright, actually. It's so bright because of the lens flare, you can't see any detail. We need to get that back, and also the same with the skyline. There are plenty of clouds we can see, but we can't really see them very well, so let's do that. All right, so let's go through exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks one more time. So we're probably going to take the exposure down a little bit, add a little bit of contrast, because in a lens flare, everything kind of gets brought to the same tone almost. You can see that there's like almost no detail because of how bright it is. When you add more contrast, you can see it a little bit better. Not by much, but a little bit better. So we're definitely going to bring the highlights down on this one so we can try to get that face back and that skyline back. So that looks way better. We got a lot of the sky back, a lot of the face back, but it's a little bit too dark now, so we need to bring up these shadows. There we go, that's looking a little bit better. And maybe we didn't need to bring the exposure down in the first place. Or maybe we did. And that's basically the process for doing the overall exposure tone area. You want to mess around with different ways of bringing the things in the image that you want back. So let's keep messing around. All right, so there you go. These are some of the basic tone adjustments you can do on your image. I hope that answers any questions you may have had about them. Real quick, again, before I finish the video, I want to go over a couple of things that are some basic problems that people who are new to Lightroom run into, and that I ran into especially. Let me reset this image entirely, get rid of everything. So sometimes when you see an image like this, you want it to really feel like it needs to pop, and you'll just turn the contrast all the way up, and you'll just say, oh, I guess the highlights are too high, so just bring them all the way down. The shadows are a little bit dark, bring them all the way up, and then we can do this. And I don't know what these do, so I'll just all the way down, all the way up. Then you end up with an image that looks like it was trying to be HDR, but there are better ways to make your image pop. So when you're editing a photo, edit it once, take a second, edit something else, come back, look at it, and say, oh man, maybe the contrast shouldn't be at 100. Maybe all the sliders shouldn't be at 100. And try to do something a little bit more toned down. All right, that was it for this episode of Lightroom 101. Thank you for watching. If you like this tutorial, please subscribe, stick around for more Lightroom 101s and other tutorials. And I make other stuff too, like I have some short films if you want to check those out. But yeah, that's all for me. Bye.